Hey, folks, welcome back to The Pulse. My name is Matt. This is Crypto Heartbeat. It's that time again, episode number 32 with Steve Staggs. Folks, so many more people are tuning into this, which is fantastic. And it's just a joy. It's like Friday comes around, it's like, it's time for Steven Friday. I told you in the very beginning, and I repeat it every time. The moment I met Steve, I shook his hand, and the Lord said to me, he's like, listen to this guy. And I'm like, okay. I was like, is he an angel? And you know what's funny is I've realized, yes, if an angel is a messenger, then Steve Staggs is an angel to me. And he's been such a good friend and such an encouragement, and hopefully an encouragement to you. And I know many of the people that are in the chat feel that way. But when you meet someone, you know something. Our guest today is the same way. I literally saw him, and you can see the pureness in his eyes and his heart for the Lord. And it's going to be awesome for you to meet Frank Molina if you haven't previously. But before we do that, let's bring on the man that this whole thing is named after, right side up, with Steve Staggs. What's up, Steve?
Hey, man. How you doing?
I'm good. It's good to see you once again.
Well, likewise.
Well, we've got some people here. I always like going through the chat with you so we can see who has stopped in, but more people than normal have. I think they're excited to hear from Frank as well. Hornet UK, be thou my vision. Good to see you. And then there's the Florida Mystery Man himself. Good morning, great friends. Just another mushroom growing in faith. He is a fun guy. He is a fun guy. There is no question about it. Mike, it's so good to see you, right? He's the test.
He is.
It's so great to see you. Sam Kemp, good morning. Finally on time for a change. Yeah, TNM's been keeping you busy. There's all sorts of things. You know when you're over the target because you get the fire from below. So absolutely keep it up, Sam. You got more energy than I hope I have as much energy as you have. It's amazing. So Sam, good to see you. Mike Ostell is here, and the David Lee has woken up from his winter nap. Good day, right side up, fam. Hope you're all having a wonderful day. David Lee is the guy who is the picture of watching out for other people. He's the guy that came to my dad's funeral. Remember that? Yeah, you've heard that about 1,000,000 times, but I'm so appreciative of it because it's a picture of loving one another. And so thanks, Steve. Identity Block, what's going on? Good to see you. Godfather J6, always a staple of all of these things. And then Hornet UK with a verse, Matthew 9:9, and as Jesus passed forth from thence, he saw a man named Matthew sitting at the receipt of customs, and he said unto him, follow me, and he arose and followed him. Well, let's hopefully we're in the right namesake here, Hornet UK. Thank you for all your support. And then Hex Glenn, thanks for coming in. Steve, you've got big plans, I would assume, for the holiday season. I'm always envious of the grandchildren thing because I'm looking so forward to it. Are you excited about this time with the family?
Oh, yeah. This is a huge time. I think I mentioned last time, my wife, and, she kind of gets into stuff. And so this is a really probably her most fun time, of the year. And so she's out doing stuff and looking forward to having the kids together. So we always get together, have a great time. We're looking forward to it again this year. And our granddaughters, who are the youngest two of our grandchildren, are just now getting to the place they're 12 and 10. So you're into a whole different world. Our granddaughter Reese, who is 12, when she was asked to put together her Christmas list, it was a mere 5 pages.
That's so great. That is so great.
And Ruby, who's a little works with a little more brevity, hers was 2.
Okay, that is so fantastic. That is so great.
So we're in a different era, and it's fun.
Yeah. Well, we've got, this is it's such a joy. I think about this, and Frank's going to come in here in a second, and I know he's the kind of guy that thinks about this too. Is who do you want to be? Do you have a vision for what your future may be like? And I think about Steve, just the model. You're living life, telling me about it and all this stuff. And I think about what kind of man do I want to be, right? And Frank's probably like, you're an old man already, dude. And I'm like, I'm still working on it, right? I'm still working on it. But when I grow up, I want to be like you, Steve. And I admire that. And I really see your patience and the joy that you have in the moment. And I haven't always lived in that, right? I'm learning to appreciate the fact that all we've got is like this series of snapshots. And so I'm really appreciative of that, because you're modeling even things you don't know you're modeling to me. So um,
Well, thank you for that.
yeah, I definitely admire you. Well, folks, let's bring in our guest. He's going to be a guest here in the first hour. Frank and I met in Austin at the event, the RG3 event, or the Million Pulse Tour, and he was dressed up with his buddies, and I just had to meet these guys, and boy, I'm so glad I did. Folks, welcome Frank Molina. What's up, Frank?
Hey, how you doing? Great to be on the show.
Yeah, you bet, man. You know what's so cool is we talked, and we literally connected over Jesus. I think that was like the number one thing that we connected on, and it's amazing to me whenever I go to events. It's like that's what people want to talk about. But I saw something in your eye. It was a twinkle in your eye that I recognize. I see it in Steve's eye as well. Tell us about yourself and in your story and background. Love to learn more, and just appreciate you willing to come on and sit with me and Steve.
Yeah, no problem. Well, on the professional side, my background's in finance. I work in treasury now, and I've always been on the investing side of things, working towards that direction. But a couple years ago, I came across a mentor who was a believer. He's a Christian, and he had a multiple business ventures that he had going on. So that's how we connected, right? He connected us, me and my friends, the individuals that you met, and a handful of others, and we connected on the business side. And he used that as his bait to get us in,
Yeah.
right?
Mhm.
And I learned so much from that experience of what he did to attract the young audience, right? He lured you in with, hey, I have business, be successful. He actually became multimillionaire through Bitcoin. So it's just very, very interesting how the world comes back and repeats itself in certain ways. And during that process, he incorporated us like in this little session called boot camp. So it was about a 2-year journey for me, where we would go into his property out in Magnolia, which is out in the countryside outside of Houston, and he had about 13 acres of land. And during that process, we were practicing business and at the same time incorporate the spiritual side, which was he would have us do manual labor on his property. And the essence of the manual labor wasn't necessarily anything other than your mind is at a mundane setting. So during that mundane setting, are you in prayer? Are you in constant communication with the Lord? And that was the practice. That was a habit that he was instilling upon us, was when you're doing something in life, whether it's in business, whether it's at work, whether it's meeting new people, whether you're out with friends, where is your mind? Where's your spiritual uh, purpose? And where is your spiritual direction heading towards? And he taught us many things, like when you come across someone and you know that they're lost, all you have to do is one simple prayer. May the kingdom of Christ come down upon you. And that's it. And you let God handle the rest. And ever since that journey where I went with him and me and my friends, we discovered the important purpose of what the financial resources are about, what not being enslaved to the corporations, why that's so important. It's not about so you can go and have all these luxury things. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's the ability to have freedom so then you can devote yourself to pursuing something and deliver a message that the world needs, and hopefully we can get into the specifics of that later. But there's a lot of things going on in the world that we're seeing today that they're going against the things that God wants us to do. And I think that's very important to acknowledge and to expose, right?
Yep.
So that people are aware.
Well, what I appreciate so much, Frank, is, what I hear you saying is, why in the world are we doing all of this stuff, right? And to have someone, we got 3 generations here on this call of just men that are seeking to ask that same question, and the fact that you're holding the thought captives, right? That's what we often are talking about: is what is this relationship with Jesus if it's not one of communication? And so I applaud you for that. But two, also want to point out the fact that you're among friends, because as we journey to understand, all right, why did you make me? Why did you put me here? What is the purpose of all this? And how is this framework constructed? And then, one of the great things that Steve has shared, and I know he'll share here as well, is having the right perspective, right? And understanding how to look at things and to understand there's a framework to this. It's built a certain way, and so many people within our culture are not recognizing what's behind it. And so I just want to say it's awesome to meet you. It's awesome to be in relationship and community with you. I talked to Axes Alive, and I asked him, I said, is there something else going on here? Right? The money is like, everybody wants to talk about the money, but it sounds like you have an understanding of what's behind this. And I love the term bait, right? That is like the absolute perfect. It's like God is using the money to attract people attention into community so that his name would be known. Steve, what do you think about all that? I know you got a lot rattling around in your head there, so I'd love to hear from you.
Oh, I mean, I think we, early on in our relationship, I think I shared with you that, that there are 10,000 businessmen out there that Jesus has put in place and is preparing. And it's just a matter of him then calling them in to their particular role at the appropriate time, but they are there and ready, whether they know they're ready or not. And it sounds like Frank is giving an example of what that looks like. Not something he planned, not something he anticipated. It just all of a sudden showed up, tapped him on the shoulder and said, "Hey man, you interested? Is this something you'd like to do?" Whether he would put that vocabulary to it or not at the time, that's essentially what happened. And when he stepped into it, it was like, wow, I think this is worth not only getting involved in, but telling other people about, which is what he's doing right now. Yep. So I just see it happening, man.
Yeah, isn't it cool? It's so cool, Frank. So when you kind of distill, you said kind of the specifics of these things. What are you seeing? What are you sensing? What are you called to? And what is the plan if you have any clarity at all?
Yeah, it's a very interesting. And I don't want to talk too much because it's a prayer topic that I'm still, setting myself into. But the biggest conclusion that I came to this week was that we have a lot of people in the Western world, and we have a lot of influence who don't live in the Western world, who influence the Western world a lot. And the biggest person that comes to mind is in my generation, a lot of people look up to people like Andrew Tate.
Yep.
And a lot of the stuff that he says about the masculine role, I believe that's important. But the conclusion that I came to is that his final message, his conclusion to everything isn't Christ. And then the biggest prayer topic that I've been holding on to over the past couple of weeks is the world needs someone like him, but it's going to deliver the message of Jesus is the Christ. And that is something that I'm holding on to. The money is important because it allows you to, like we said, bait people into you, right? The physical contributions of being physically strong, combative is also important because it gives you the physical presence amongst people. The ability to be competent, well-spoken, have an influence, people listen to you, respected, very important. But the person who can do all of that and deliver the message of Christ is something that is super needed in this world, because we see it in the Western world all the time. What's going on with the education system, what's going on in California, all these different things that are happening around us. People are questioning their identity, people questioning God's nature and biology. Those are all important things as to that's not what God created us to be, right? And then you see a lot of the people self-worship, right? And when you have self-worshiping, that's another form of making yourself an idol, right? And when you make yourself an idol, you're essentially saying that you're more powerful than our Creator, Lord. So a lot of these things, you just see it over and over again. And what's getting significantly worse is that our younger generation, it's becoming the norm. A couple months ago, I believe one of my friends who was also in the same journey as I am, he's referring to kids nowadays are referring to intimacy, like young kids, like late middle school, late elementary, early middle school, intimacy time as demon time. And then things like that, where it's just slowly the youth is being programmed by Disney, by Hollywood, by the content that we're seeing, because there's nobody in there to say, hey, look up to me, look what I can achieve. But then at the end of the day, you're using them as a bait so you can deliver the message that Christ is your savior. Christ is the answer. And Christ is going to be the thing that is going to give you that fulfillment and purpose in life. In our community, the reason why I don't think about money anymore is because I already see that's already there. There's nothing better, right? So then if you're already taking care of the financial part, what is your overall purpose after that? And that's going to be saving the people of this generation who are younger, especially my age. Like I'm 27 going on 28. I'm seeing my younger brother who's 16, 15. That generation is like they're glued to their phone. And when they're constantly glued to their phone and they're not seeing the things that need to be seen, like content that we're talking about right now, it's going to be a problem. And the Western world is going to collapse, because anything that collapses is going to come from, it's not designed by God. It's designed by the enemy.
Interesting. Thoughts, Steve?
Yeah, I think probably the one thought I would offer to the conversation is that we are trained to look at a problem and then attack the problem by dealing with the fruit of the problem or the result of the problem. And yet we know that doesn't solve the problem. And so one of the contributing factors to that mentality is that we don't take a step back and say, okay, why are our kids acting like that? Why is it that intimacy, as Frank is talking about, is now called demon time? We look at the malady and we want to attack the malady and look at the malady as something that needs to be eradicated, but we don't take a step back to say, why is it there and who is the author of that? Now we will presume the author in the dialogue and vocabulary of this conversation is the devil and the kingdom of darkness. Okay, fair enough. But why is the devil and the kingdom of darkness putting that together? Why is that important to what they're doing? And then in that, through that approach to the problem, then say, Jesus, how are you seeing this thing? I'm seeing the result. I'm seeing the product. I think I know who the source is here. What are you seeing? What is it that you see that I need to see? And how do you feel about that, by the way? Is this something that's giving you a hairball? Are you concerned about this? What exactly is your attitude toward this thing? That when I look at it is an absolute perversion of the most precious thing that we have, which is our children, not only in the present, but then they represent our future. How are you seeing this? And then, Jesus, what is your approach toward this? And then what is my role in that approach? So there's a whole succession of, once we see something, in the vocabulary of some of the white papers that we've talked about, once we see it because Jesus has brought that into his theater of light. Otherwise, we couldn't see it. And once it's into his theater of light, he is ready to expose to whomever is interested in participating with him and how he's approaching that. He's ready to open that thing up A to Z to you. But you got to stop, pause, not presume you know what's going on, not get distracted by or carried away by the fruit, the result of what's happening, but then take a different approach and say, okay, it sounds to me, Jesus, you're revealing this because it's time to strap it on. Oh, Jesus used this language. He said, it's time to lay the axe to the root. He didn't attack the bad fruit of the tree. He attacked what the tree was using to draw nutrients in order to produce the fruit. He attacked the root by laying the axe to the root. And so that is a way we're not taught how to think.
Yeah.
It's not a way we're taught how to operate. And yet, it's what we were designed to do from the beginning, because otherwise we can't rule. But
You know, it's amazing about this. And so, Frank, welcome to this discussion. This is how it goes. And so, let me share with you, this is our 32nd episode. And of course, Steve and I spent hours and hours and hours, probably the equivalent amount, not on stream. And one of the things that I picked up from the very beginning is this idea, and it really became clear to me that my experience within the church, and I came to know the Lord at 28 years old. So just to give you perspective, I was a grown ass man when I kind of recognized the power. And what's interesting about that is what I've come to realize is that presented in my experience of training, if you will, Christian training in its traditional sense, was one that Jesus is a great historical figure. And that on Sunday morning of Easter, I'll look over at you, Frank, and I'll say, he is risen, right? And we'll be so happy about Easter Sunday. But what I've realized, and I've taken note of this every time I go to church, and I still go, and I listen carefully. And what I hear is not intentional in the sense that people are saying, I'm going to intentionally telegraph to you that Jesus is dead. He's not alive. And one of the amazing things about this with engaging with Steve is, and really this discussion, which I think is we inherently know, and I've tested this out on people that are like, hey, I'm a believer. I believe Jesus is the way. Okay, great. Do you believe that Jesus is alive and he speaks? And of course, everyone I know would say, well, heck yeah. Yeah, that's right on. Well, actually, I do not see regularly that being promoted. And why? This idea that you can have literally a conversation in real time with the author and creator of the whole thing. All things were made for him and by him. We give it kind of lip service of a relationship with Jesus. But when Steve said to me, he said, name a person in your life that you have a relationship with that you don't talk to. And I was like, wow, it's pretty stunning here. And it's not always just an audible thing. But one of the things that I sense in this whole conversation that I want to kind of reflect back is the fact that, we have some skills. Frank, you've got good communication skills. You're a good-looking guy, right? You have good intentions. You love the Lord and you want to do these things. And you see the fruit all over the place. I see it too, right? It's like, man, yeah, the kids and all this kind of stuff. And what I think is really interesting is Steve came to our Gen Con and he shared a story about the high places. And of course, Steve can share that. But one of the amazing things, and I feel like you're communicating this as well, Frank, is that having the perspective, seeing things from Jesus' perspective, when I read the scriptures and I see the stories, I'm like, hold on a second. He used Nebuchadnezzar? Whoa, 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 whoa. I thought he only used the people who did it the way the church folks said it was to be done. You mean people that don't even declare that you're Lord are going to be used by you because you're going to accomplish the things that you set out to accomplish? So maybe it'd be helpful as I see this poor fruit that I might want to understand his perspective on it. And I think that's what's so cool, because what you first communicated was this idea of what does it look like to literally engage and hold each thought captive to a living Jesus. And to me, that's the thing that seems so obvious, but is really not promoted. We at least that's how I see it. What are your thoughts to that, Frank? Like, do you see the same thing happening where people are like, yeah, Jesus was a good guy. He was.
Yeah, that's a very interesting topic because it kind of connects to both statements that were said by both individuals. I like to speak from the perspective of what my mentor told me, right? Because I'm still a young guy. A lot of people don't think that I'm old enough to give a lot of wisdom. So my wisdom comes from people who are older than me. And that gives a little bit more credibility. He taught me during my journey with my spiritual journey with him and learning the salvation, right? Jesus Christ, that the individuals, every thought that comes into your head or every question that you have, the question of why, exactly what Steve was talking about, it really resonated with me, to my heart, because every question is actually a prayer topic. And then that's one thing that we learned, is that every question that you have, why am I here? Why did I meet this individual? Why are these people lost? Why is there constant, divide between good and evil? And why is there constant, judgment amongst us as humans? And all of those things, they turn into your prayer topics. Most people confuse prayer with getting down on your knees and just, singing all, the typical prayer that you've been taught when you were little. But prayer is actually just communication. That's all it is. Because prayer is just constant, genuine communication with you and Jesus, and asking him, what direction do you want me to go? You've put me here. You've introduced me to individuals. You put these thoughts in my head. You put these thoughts in my heart. Where it is that you want me to go? And then you let him present you the opportunity. Because leading up to me going to the Austin event, I always had the thought process, or as what we just discovered is that thoughts are equal prayers. Who am I going to come across? Who am I going to come across that you're going to make me an impact with? And that eventually came into an answer, right? So each question that you have is an answer. And then to go on to the second point is that the church, what I've seen in the Western world is that Christianity as a religion, they do a lot of judgment towards people who are quote unquote damaged or lost or sinful in their words, right? But whenever you go out, for example, my generation likes to go out to certain bars and clubs in the evening. Your physical presence of where you are is not really the most important. It's the thoughts and prayers that are going through your head in that moment. The people who need the most salvation, the people who need Christ the most, are the people that you don't expect to see at the church. So if you're constantly just saying, oh, I don't want to hang around with people who go to bars and clubs and all these different things because they're bad people, because they don't have Christ with them, because they're not believers, and you only associate yourself to people who are believers, well, then you're not really doing an impact towards the world, because you're not saving those people who Jesus came down and wanted you to save. So those are the thought processes that go through my head whenever a lot of traditional Christian religion people talk about, is that they don't want to associate with people who are bad, but those are the people that need the most saving, right? So whenever you go across them and you know that they're lost and you know that they need Christ, all you have to do is do a simple prayer. May the kingdom of Christ come down upon you, and let God handle the rest. Whether he presents that opportunity for you to deliver the message to them, that's up to him. But everybody has their own time schedule, and us trying to force it on someone else, well, then you have to ask yourself, if I'm forcibly doing it, is that God's will or my will? Is that his desire, or is that my own ego and pride to try to save someone because I wanted to get that credibility? And that's the thing that most people, sometimes they forget, that because we are humans, we are all flawed in many, many ways, that even when we want to do good, the enemy tries to attack us in ways that we don't see. So he uses pride, he uses ego, he uses arrogance. How can I speak about that? Because I was once that person, and I'm still that person, and I'm still growing from that person, right? Because that's what my mentor brought out about me. He exposed that about me. Pride, ego, arrogance, all those things, if you don't use it in the right way, they will be used. Satan will use that to think that you're going in the right direction, but he's just pulling you in the wrong direction. So those are just my thoughts on those two conversations.
Awesome. Frank, Steve, thoughts?
No, it's hey, this is fun.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fun. Mentorship has been around and been kind of a popular thing, especially within business, probably for about 30 years, 35 years. But what Frank is talking about is what mentorship actually looks like. He's not only describing having a mentor, but then positioning himself with respect to that mentor, and then deferring to the mentor to walk into the things that his mentor is teaching him and sharing him with him, so that he has a chance to grow into it, and then passing on to us the effect of that it's having in his life. And that's the model of the kingdom. And we're in a time in particular where that model is being inverted. The vocabulary the Lord's given me is authority inversion, where the least informed and the least experienced and the least empowered and the ones who possess the least amount of authority are at the top of the chain. Well, that's a strategic, there's a strategic intention for doing that. And we see the results of it, in our culture in particular, when you put the least informed, the least empowered, the least experienced, and the one with the least amount of authority at the top of the authority chain, and then have them start to direct stuff. It flipping falls apart. And anybody who's lived 15 minutes beyond that looks at that and says, what in the world are you doing? That's nonsense. But then there are all kinds of lines of defenses that are put up in order to parry that off, because that strategic intention has to be preserved in order for an intention to be accomplished. Well, Frank is operating in the exact opposite model of that. And as a result, he's having a chance to grow into, in a few short minutes, weeks, months, maybe even a couple of years, what his mentor took maybe years and decades to learn. Well, that's the model. That's the model. It's supposed to start inside the family. You mentioned the family. That's where it begins, with mom and dad talking to the children and then raising the children up. Oh, there's this little verse that says, teach a child in the way they should go, and when they grow up, they won't depart from it. See? I have no idea what Frank, your background was in terms of your family life and your training, but something was going on there that's right, because you're taking a contrary approach to the cultural norm today by seeking out and then following a mentor to learn from. So I say, awesome, man. Keep it up, because whether you know it or not, you're going to be a mentor someday too, and actually are to somebody. And usually you don't really know that's happening until somebody taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, and tells you what effect you're having on them. So I just think it's the coolest thing in the world. Thanks for sharing that, Frank.
That's awesome. That's awesome. And it's, I'm kind of practicing the same thing here, Frank. Steve's been that mentor to me, and, the growth that comes from someone who is as patient as Steve, but also one, you think about, if you've watched this series, Steve was a professional baseball player, and in the course of that, the Lord got a hold of him, and basically, if you've heard that story, it's one of a journey of, what's it been since you left baseball, Steve? 40 years, 35 years, something like that?
Yeah, I left twice. He put me back in for a short time just to see that if I meant what I said. And but that was 1979.
Okay, so since 1979, and
years.
What's amazing to me is, you said this to me before, Steve. It's like, hey, it's taken me a long time, right? And it's not always been just like giggles, right? And it's a journey. But what I think is so amazing, Frank, and I just appreciate you being on there and just being honest about this, is, Steve has talked about a concept called the transfer with me, and it's language in which I was like, what does this mean? I've heard about the transfer of wealth. I've heard about all these kind of different transfers. And what I think is really amazing, I've come to understand over this time, is that, God's nature and character. And I keep coming back every time we talk about it to the prodigal son, who in the father's wisdom allows the son to take his inheritance, which, in this case is the money, and to literally squander it. And so Steve said to me that, he said at one point, he said, the father financed this debauchery. And to think that a father with such foresight, and this is the, Father God himself, with enough foresight of understanding that in this process, the only way that you will come to know the nature and character of your father is through experience. And so you have this authority, you have this right, you have this inheritance, and you pretty ballsy come up here and say, "Hey, I want it." Okay, all right, you have the right to ask for that. But what I love about that story more than anything, Frank, and it's what I see in this whole mentorship thing is that I had to get to the end of myself, and I had to be eating with the pigs. And it's like, can I even go back to my father's house? Can I even go back? Maybe he'll let me be like one of his servants. And to think that he would come run out, put a robe around my, shoulders and kiss my face and put on a ring. And that ring is the signature of the Father. That is the authority. And I think probably the greatest thing I've learned from Steve over this last year is understanding what it means to walk in the authority of God in his nature and character. And I wouldn't have known what his nature and character was unless there was someone like Steve going, "Hey," or, the experiences of eating with the pigs. And to think that now this signet ring, this ring of authority that's been given is his impression. And you articulated it so well, Frank. You're like, you know what? That's his work to do. I have a role to play. And it's such a cool concept of partnership with him. And you use the term prayer. And I think about this idea of saying, how do you see this? Jesus, how do you see this? How do you see these kids glued to their phones? How do you see this demon time? How do you see what's going on in this world? And to think that that is the transfer of the person, right? And that what I hope comes out of all this, and it's really back to the original part, is that God is using the money, right? 10,000x, big bags, diamond hands, all this stuff that we're seeing in crypto. It's like, I think that if I had the money, I'd have peace in my life. If I just had the money. Now, the money is resource and it's a great tool. And I believe that, with that vision comes a provision, right? To be able to accomplish those things. But if the eyes of the Lord search to and fro to find those whose hearts are completely his so that he may strengthen them, I hope that he sees us. And so I just want to encourage you, Frank, and I just appreciate it. It gives me actually hope for people younger than me. So I really appreciate it, man.
Thank you. Thank you.
So very, very cool. Well, we've gone through already 38 minutes, if you can possibly believe that. But I wanted to kind of shift for a second and kind of share something that has been really on my mind and really, and Frank, I don't know if you've heard this before, but when I got into this whole crypto game and started a channel and it started growing, like you're experiencing growth as well, I really asked the Lord, why? What is the purpose? And I've been asking that for a long time. And I'm always reminded of David, right? When he sees Goliath, everybody's afraid except him. And they're trying to put armor on him and all that stuff. And I believe that we've all fought the lion and the bear, right? That you have experiences in your life and mentors and all of these things are coming together for this thread of redemption, the story that's being told. And that as we partner with Jesus, we see that purpose in like Technicolor. And right now, one of the things that I've, got this eclectic interest in is what we call disclosure and what people, I've been following the whole UFO stuff since I was a kid. And people made fun of me left and right. And there's some things that are happening right now. On one end of the kind of scientific scale, we see, stuff in, David Grush comes out before Congress talking about these flying objects, right? But there's something I want to play for you, and I want to get your commentary on this, Steve and Frank, about what is behind this interaction. And this is an interaction between Tucker Carlson and Clayton Morris, he leads a podcast called Redacted. And I want you to read between the lines on this because it's pretty. It illustrates something that I felt is coming, and I want to dive into this. All right, let's get this up on the screen.
But this is not just stuff that I read on another story. The second thing that bothers me is the UFO story, and the more you dig into that and talk to people with actual knowledge of it, again, that's another story where there are some, fanciful ideas floating around that are just, there's no evidence that they're true. But if you talk to people who, have actual knowledge of it that they gathered themselves, there are parts of that story that I do not understand at all. that are really, really, really dark. It's so dark that I, haven't told my wife about it. I mean, I haven't verified any of this, but this is not just stuff that I read on the internet. I know you all are very, very grounded in that story. So I think I know, what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
But there's some stuff there that's just like, man, I'm not even sure what that means. There's a spiritual component there that I don't fully understand. So yes, that story bothers me. And I think last thing I'll say, that one of the reasons that we've had all these disclosures and all of these, 10 whistleblowers at this point, and it hasn't really become front page news. Part of it's suppression. Parts of the government don't want you to know about it, but part of it is the public can't deal with it. It's too far out. The implications are too profound. And so, and I understand that, because I've heard things where I'm just like, oh man, I don't even really want to know that, honestly.
Deeply disturbing stuff. Forget like saucers and technology. It's deeply disturbing stuff that I haven't even told Natalie. Yep. I agree with you. It's so disturbing. Exactly. I can't even tell my kids. My kids ask me different stories about it, and I won't say it because it's so dark. It's so dark.
I totally agree.
Miles is watching. So.
Okay, Miles, if you're watching the show, Daddy's not going to tell you about that part of the UFO stuff and what's going on with the government.
Well, can I say one thing? They've known clearly. I mean, this is, I think, established, and I feel comfortable saying this as fact. The U.S. government, these are real, whatever they are. They're not human. And the government has known that for a long time, possibly going back to the 1930s at least. And of course, there's tons of evidence in the written record, in the physical record, in paintings, and in literature, that people have been seeing and interacting with these things for a long time. So we know that. But the justification one often hears is, well, the government, various presidents who have been read in, not all have been, haven't wanted to disclose this because it would scare people. And I've always thought that's bullshit. You're hiding a crime, which they are, by the way, in my opinion. But I do think there's a sense in which that's not totally crazy. Like, there is some stuff, if it's true, and I'm kind of thinking it may be true, that's so radical that, well, as we both said, we don't want to tell the people we love most about it, because, like, why would you disturb someone like that? So I kind of get that. I hate to admit it. I'm not arguing for hiding things. I believe in the truth and I believe in disclosure, but I understand the impulse. Like, holy smokes, this is heavy. You know what I mean?
And the government's involvement in it makes it even heavier, because then you realize the complicity.
Exactly.
Okay. All right. That's a lot. Okay. And I'm throwing a lot out here for your commentary, but I want to say this. When I was a kid, right, I was super interested in this stuff, and, I was convinced that it was real. And for years and years, people made fun of me. Right. And so one of the things I really like about it is, hey, there's something here. But if you've read your Bible and you understand these stories, you recognize that what we see isn't a clear picture of everything. And it seems to me like there is a force that is holding things back. And so as I approach the spiritual component of this, and I understand that there is good and there is evil, my church experience has been one of kind of meek and mild Jesus, right? It's been one of, almost my experience in the 80s and 90s was, pretty benign, right? We didn't have bombs dropping on us. We didn't see, too many crazy things. And here we are coming into this time where all the money's changing, all the politics is changing. We're seeing disclosure and now AI, right? Things are, the amount of change is rapidly increasing. And then I spend time with Steve. And what do I see? An understanding of the framework of how things are built, and that why in which we would have a situation in which our authority is being given away and we are becoming subjects to a system. And I think most people, like Kobayashi in The Usual Suspects, is the greatest trick the devil ever played, was to convince people that he didn't exist. And I think what we're going to see in this next year is that we're going to actually see that what was reported in 2017, that the Pentagon said, hey, we already know what they are. They're demons. And it's really interesting, people kind of laugh that off that are on the scientific side of things. But there's two ends of this spectrum. And I'm going to say something pretty aggressive right now. On one hand, it's flying saucers and forward-looking radar that's seeing these crafts, and they're doing all kinds of things that we can't imagine from a physics perspective. But on the other end of the spectrum, what we're hearing about is the stories of old, which is the sacrifice and the devouring and consumption of human flesh. Okay. And that's crazy talk, right? That's what they're talking about on that they don't share with their wives. And one of the things that I feel like is in a way for me shocking in many respects is the fact that this isn't a new idea. This idea of sacrificing our children to make sure that the evil forces and those of the in the spiritual realm are satiated enough to leave us alone. And it's interesting that these things are coming to a head now. And so as I look out at this, we are about to hear about disclosure. Is that going to be the fun parts of, anti-gravity? Or is that going to be the truth that actually we're living within a world that is that has evil forces, and there are people within our government or people within our society that are aligned directly with them, and that this is a battle not between flesh and blood, but between these principalities and these powers. So I toss all of that out to you guys. And Steve, I'm going to give you the first go ahead on this. How should we look at this? Because I think we've been convinced, at least in the Western world, that that's just an old religious idea. And here it comes all the way back around to be, right in our face.
Well, yeah, if there's one thing that I've tried to contribute on these weekly shows from a standpoint of not just how God has created things to work and why, but also then what is our relationship to it, which is more about positioning. Now, we've only touched on the concept of positioning, here and there. But in the spiritual world, in the world of heaven, as we often refer to it from a biblical standpoint, positioning is probably the most paramount dynamic that exists in that domain. Now, what is positioning? Positioning is, do you possess the authority to be doing the things that you are doing? That's essentially what positioning is. And so you see this dynamic occurring throughout, the biblical record, the scriptural record. We've asked the question, for example, with the serpent. Well, if Satan was so powerful, why didn't he just walk into the garden and say, folks, I'm taking over. I'm the covering cherub. I am the highest among the highest of the angelic order. I got power out of the gazoo. I'm taking over. Why didn't he do that? Why did he have to go through this elaborate process? First, by engaging through the mechanism of transaction with the serpent, the physical being, the physical creature, and then using the physical creature of the serpent as an agent to approach the lesser in the authority structure of the woman first, instead of going to the senior member of the class of man, going directly to him. Why did he go to the woman? Well, virtually everything I've mentioned has at the core of it the why question that seeks to understand what this whole exercise was about. That's all centered in position. The reason why Satan did not do that is because he had no position. He had no authority to rule the earth. He had no authority. And if he couldn't rule the earth, he couldn't rule man. If he couldn't rule man, he couldn't accomplish his objectives in the earth. He had to gain man's permission, where man would then transfer to him the authority that man possessed, which then gave Satan standing. We saw the same thing in the temptation of Jesus in the wilderness. We completely skip over what the dynamic that was in play. Why, Father, did you put Jesus in this position? being led by the Spirit into the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. What did you have in mind? We'll say, yeah, to prove that he was sinless. No. Come on. God's a bigger thinker than that. Okay, what was going on there? The temptation was to see if there was anything that could have happened to Jesus that would cause him to grant the devil standing, to actually have authority. Because once he did that, he would, by doing that, subjugate himself to the devil. Well, virtually everything we're talking about over these 32 weeks has been about standing. Folks, we're not talking about this because of some religious idea or belief system we're trying to promote. There are plenty of those out there. Take your pick. We're talking about how this thing works. And standing is an essential component to it. So when we talk about the UFOs and all the stuff that's going on around there, the number one issue is standing. They want to take over the planet. They can't do it until we say, yes, you can. And so, folks, what are we going to say? Are we going to say, yep, you can? How do we say, yes, you can? By, first of all, embracing the fear that they have something that they can do to us, because once you enter into that dynamic of fear, you're now playing in their playground. And they make all the rules in their playground. That's one of the ways you transfer standing to them. The other is denial. No, hey, look, we don't know what's going on here. All I want to know is the truth. Jesus, what's the truth about what's going on here? How do you see this? Well, we talked about in the white papers that, hey, Satan and the kingdom of darkness, man, they've been cast to the earth to operate in a little time, and they see the sand pouring through the hourglass. They are in a state of desperation, and a desperate party does not care what you see about them. They only care that they can survive. Guess what? Here we are.
Yeah.
Here we are. So what are we going to do? Are we going to grant that standing? Or are we going to say, no, that's not what we're going to do? Last week, some of the comments about AI. Hey, folks, AI is not going to do anything more than what we grant it permission to do. Don't position yourself as a victim, one who's subordinate to a greater power. Don't do that. Okay? Don't grant it standing. You want to turn it off, turn the damn thing off. You see? So, standing, we are now being confronted with, in my view, one of those elements of understanding what standing is really all about, and what is our position going to be with regard to the things we don't yet understand. Are we going to, head for cover? Are we going to be afraid? Are we going to say, hey, it does not matter? We are the Elohim man. They don't get to do what they want just because they want to do it. No, that's not how this game is played. That's position. That's standing. And that's what I'd offer to folks, regardless of what comes after us. Know who you are, in the kingdom design. And once that recognition hits you, all of a sudden this stuff goes back to one of our early questions, right, Matt? Well, what difference does it make?
Yeah.
What difference does it make?
What's so great about it, Steve, and I appreciate you sharing that, this idea of authority and, giving it over, there's very practical things to this, right? This is like the most outlandish current topic we could talk about, but I see this happening all the time.
Yeah.
Is that, am I holding each thought captive, and am I seated with Jesus, like looking at things from his perspective, or am I gripped with fear? And we talked the other day about how there are so many open ports, right? Yeah. You said many times, it's this, who has authority to speak to you, right? Yeah. You said, the wages of sin is death. Well, somebody is paying the wages. Who are you working for? And I love that because it shows this, basically you're coming up underneath the authority of someone else, whether it be the Constitution, whatever it may be, is you have forgotten who you are. And you said that to me so many times in those early days, is to understand, who are we saying that we are, and how are we acting? And I think it's wonderful, because it's very encouraging to say, it has no power over me. Right. And some of the things that have been so beneficial to me, and Frank, I'll kind of pass this along to you. The most powerful thing I think that I've practiced since, having this last year of kind of an awakening for myself is, Jesus, you're the only one who has authority to speak to me. Right. I do not give authority to anything, to fear, to depression, to whatever it may be. And to recognize, the more and more I read the scriptures, I see, literally Jesus saying, "Get behind me, Satan." He didn't say, "Get behind me, Peter." He said, "Get behind me, Satan." And this idea that, hold on, when Jesus was in that wilderness, and he said, and Satan said to him, "Turn these stones into bread." And what did Jesus say? Man does not live on bread alone, but out of every word that comes out of the mouth of God. And I think it's so amazing, is there's so much reference to the fact that Jesus is alive. He speaks. He has a perspective, and he is not surprised by any of this. And what's so encouraging to me is that this transfer of the man, which God has done with me and us, is one of saying, all right, I'm preparing you. And so when you said, Frank, when you came in, and you're like, yeah, the money is like bait. All of this stuff, it's like, it hasn't been consequential in my lifetime, because the stakes haven't been high. And as I see the stakes becoming higher and higher, and us literally facing and looking evil directly in the eye, it's becoming exposed. And like Steve said, they're on the run. What decision are you going to make? You have a choice to make. Are you going to lead and make your decisions in the nature and character of God himself, right? By listening to the perspective of Jesus and following him? Or are you going to give up your authority to the one who is that has to have it in order to act? And so anyway, I'm so thankful for this, because it gives a framework for saying, okay, this isn't something to be afraid of. It is dark, but it's not something that we can't stare directly in the face and say no. Frank, what are your thoughts on all that? I know that's a lot, but welcome to Right Side Up with Steve Staggs. I mean, here you go.
Yeah, that was fantastic. I'm going to speak from what I learned in my journey, and, what my mentors taught me, who's been in the gospel for many, many years. The first thing I like that I love that Steve touched about the garden, right? Why didn't Satan come in and just say, I have authority over you? Well, we look in the beginning in Genesis. Men and women, Adam and Eve, were created with Christ in the beginning. They were with Christ from the beginning, because Christ is the beginning, the end, the first and the last, the Alpha and the Omega. So he was there from the beginning. And that's where the garden was paradise. The apple is a metaphor for separation. So the metaphor is humans, mankind, being separated from Christ into now being under the authority of Satan. That was the original sin that most people don't refer back to. The original sin is being separated from Christ, which was the garden. And then as soon as that separation happened, through the metaphor, the apple, then they became slaves to Satan. So now everybody that came after became under the authority of Satan. And then we spend now our life trying to regain that relationship with Christ, right? That's what mankind came after, that is rebuilding that relationship with Christ. So after that moment of separation, the garden disappeared, and then humans defaulted into a life of misery, a life of work, a life of pain, because that's what Satan wants. That's when you become Satan's slave. That's the result of. That's the result of separation. All right. So when that happens, everything that followed after was a result of us giving our authority to him, and then life becomes trying to regain that relationship with Christ. And then God gave us the answer. The answer is always going to be the same: Christ. And he says, believe in Jesus and you believe in Christ, because Jesus is the Christ. So he gave us the answer to reunite us with his people. So Satan's not afraid of anything but Christ himself. If we look back at Genesis 3:15, that's the foreshadowing of Christ. Satan's head will strike Jesus' heel, right? And that's what happened on Mount Calvary when he said, everything is solved the moment that he gave his body away and Christ came. And then that was the answer to everything that every human needs to acknowledge. It's the answer that Jesus is the Christ. He's the answer to everything. And when you have that, you don't have Satan's authority over you, but you have Christ's authority over Satan because you walk with Christ. And then that right there is the lesson, the spiritual journey that I went through, is that when you encounter the truth of being saved by Christ, you see the horrible, horrible things of what the world does, right? And I'm not sure if you are familiar with the Nephilim. The Nephilim is the fallen angels that came down to earth who mated with humans, and then they created a different type of, not human, not angel. And then that's what most people refer to as aliens. I had this conversation with my close friends, the individuals that you met in Austin. And then that's what we came to the conclusion as, what is these aliens creatures that we talk about? And that is the Nephilim. That is Satan's fallen angels, or the kingdom's fallen angels mating with humans, and then creating these third dimensional, these weird type of individuals that now control society. But why is that a result of? It's all a result because of the original sin that was created in the garden, which we separated. So the people who are able to be reconnected with Christ, they're able to see it, and then they look to God, to prayer. This is what's happening in the world. How do we counter it? How do we fight it? And then the reason why we have to resort to prayer is because we can't fight it as ourselves, because then we get our pride and ego in the way. Then we take credit for God's work. We're just God's messengers. We're just God's servants. We're just God's soldiers. But he's the one that's delivering everything through us. And if we look back to the story of Joseph becoming governor, I think is one of the most amazing stories in the Bible, because it speaks from a position of someone who was a slave becoming the second most powerful man in the world. But why did it have to be Joseph who became that person? It could have been anybody else. It could have been anybody who was close to Pharaoh. It could have been Pharaoh's right-hand man at the time. But why was it that Joseph became the second most powerful man in the world? Well, because Joseph, he put his entire existence into the covenant of Christ. He had that relationship with God, and he held that relationship. He held that covenant. And the reason why that happened was because when you become in that position of authority in the physical world, you can't take credit that it was you. You have to give credit to Christ and God at the time. So we have to take that same perspective in today's world. When you walk with Christ, you have to give credit to God, because he's the one that gives you the ability to see things from a spiritual perspective, right? He gives you the ability to see the world from his eyes and his perspective, and the famous "What would Jesus do?" He gives you that thought process. But that's only possible when you have reconnected that relationship, right? And through Jesus, he was able to give us that avenue. John 14:6, I am the way and the truth and the life. Nobody comes to the Father except through me. So you can't come to these realizations unless you've gone through that way, which is Christ, which is Jesus in modern times, because that's what the New Testament is about. And I think from those perspectives of what's happened out in the world, when you take a step back and say, why was I gifted with this information? Why was I gifted with this knowledge? Why was I gifted with this wisdom? You have to, again, give credit where credit's due. It wasn't me who came to this discovery. It was God who revealed it to me, because I have that relationship through Christ. And then that gives you new prayer topics that you think about daily. You pray about daily. What is the direction that you go? And then he's eventually going to open up those doors and so what's to do. This is an awful, awful world that we live in, and we can't live in the physical because the world is spiritual. But most people think that way because all they see is physical. But we live in a spiritual world. It's a spiritual battle every single day. That's just my thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Steve, any thoughts there before we transition?
Yeah, the Nephilim, Nephilim is a huge topic. I know it's really a popular one, today. So, maybe during one of the future episodes we can kind of dive into that. But it would start, I think, with a question, which is, does the angelic class have the ability to procreate? Number one. And then number two, do they have the ability to procreate with an entirely different species of being, which is human or man? And, I've never heard anybody who's been able to address that particular issue. And I claimed back to Frank's comment earlier, I claim no intelligence in coming up with that question. That wasn't a brainchild, a child of mine, because I had a very similar view. And what I'm describing are the questions that Jesus asked me. Well, Steve, are you saying that angels have the ability to procreate? Guys, I never thought about that. Before that question came, that thought never entered my mind. Now, what's really interesting is that, well, Steve, if that didn't enter your mind, then what are you doing espousing such things? Well, Lord, forgive me. I don't know. I don't have an answer to that one. All right. And then, okay, because you know what happens? What happens is if you say, yes, they have the ability to procreate, then you say, well, the spiritual domain of the angelic beings is increasing in its population. And not only is it increasing in its population, are we saying there are male and female gendered angels? And if we say no, then are we saying that the angels were built originally like Adam, where they had both male and female capabilities within the same physical body? You see what happens when you start going down that road? And then, okay, if through all of your questions you come to, well, yes, they do. The angelic population is increasing both in heaven and in the heavens in the domain of darkness. Then the question I'd ask is then, okay, the next one is, can they procreate with another species for which they possess no physical capabilities or traits? Now, all of that to say is, well, okay, then, what did you mean then, Father, when you said the Nephilim, sorry, a little tongue-tied there, came down and knew, the daughters of man? What is it that they were doing? What is it that was joining? And how did that joining produce? And what is exactly did it produce? Well, you have an entirely different thought process, that all of a sudden, at least for me, said, oh, now that makes sense. And that is the very thing we're dealing with, not only then, but we're now seeing how this all began to transpire to where we see today the things that we see at the human level. And it's like, okay, that's a different ballgame.
Yeah.
So that's what your comments were stirring up in me, Frank.
Well, I appreciate it. Frank, it's cool that you would be willing to come on and have these conversations with us. I really appreciate that. I know that you've been on a number of other streams and such, and you're growing in popularity. How do people get a hold of you? Like, how do they connect with you?
Just the only thing I have is my Twitter, and I typically forget my handle. Let me see, what is it?
It's something 1996.
Yes, it's F Molina 1996. So if anybody
Molina.
if anybody's a fan of the content that I produce on the crypto side, and then anybody's just a fan on the stuff that I talked about today, which is, to me, is the most important. Money doesn't drive me. This drives me. So I would be happy to connect with anybody who believes in the same process that we all do. You know, I think this channel, this stream to me has been the most important because it's a greater purpose to what the money does. The money's just a tool.
Yeah, Frank, I appreciate that so much, and that's really the whole point of this. And what I think is really cool is, you know, I want to be intentional, right? I want to be intentional, but it's amazing the trajectory that it ends up following that you can't claim is of your own hand. And so I see this time and time again of what God is doing in this world, and I want to partner with Him, and I want to do and be faithful to what He's called us to do. And Frank, it's such a pleasure to know there's guys out there like you. Steve said there are at least 10,000 or more that he has called to his purposes. And it's cool that we can have this kind of relationship and build, you know, community. And to me, it's the essence of the church, if you will, right? This community that we're forming. So Frank, thanks so much for joining us. And we're going to continue on here for the next kind of 50 minutes. And I look forward to hopefully you, you know, making more content and us following your development in the community as well.
Fantastic. I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah, you bet.
Thanks,
Frank. Thanks, Frank. See you, man.
Bye.
Wow. Yeah, that was awesome.
Whoa. That's crazy stuff. You know, it's maybe we'll start doing this, right? Bringing folks in and having conversations. I think it's so interesting that there's room. So I want to get your thoughts on this, right? I've encountered a lot of people, and you know, when I met you, Steve, you asked some incredible questions, but it always fell back on this: hey, don't take my word for it. Ask him yourself, right? Yeah. So that, to me, the reason I keep doing this with you is because you keep saying that. You're like, don't trust me. Ask him yourself. And at that core of that is this idea that there is a living Jesus who is speaking. And I love the way, you know, you said it. He's like, I didn't come up with this question.
Yeah.
That's at the core essence of the transfer, isn't it? That one would recognize that the architect, the creator of all things, is available. How important is that when you're trying to dissect all of this stuff? Because there's a lot of things that seem quite confusing, but I keep coming back to the simplicity of there is one who knows.
Well, if you hold the fundamental premise that, one, there is a spiritual being that has influenced the planet, that personifies evil, that we call the devil, Satan, Lucifer, whatever name that we give to that one, the evil one, God of this world. There's a lot of different names that the scriptures, you know, assign to him. If we say that one is primarily controlling much of what's going on in the planet, and that one is a lie, then guess what's going to come out of his system? A lie.
Yep.
Now, when somebody lies, when you lie, when I lie, when we have lied over our lives, do we step up to the person and say, hey, I just want to give you fair warning, I'm going to lie to you?
Right. You don't. Yep. You generally don't telegraph that.
No. Now, why don't we? Well, I would offer, is usually out of my own experiences, because I was trying to gain some advantage out of my twisting of what is true, out of my lie. I wanted to gain some personal advantage.
Yep.
Well, thinking strategically then, why does Satan lie? Because he's trying to gain some strategic advantage. And so when you can consider those things, how in the world do you navigate through what is the volume of lies that come at us every day when the volume is turned up to a deafening noise? How do you weave through all of that? I mean, we could ask all kinds of questions about I think what you call the disclosure.
Yeah.
The demons, the aliens, all this stuff. We could ask all kinds of questions that penetrate, so much of the noise to get to some very basic fundamental questions. That then, once you get to those fundamental questions, now you've been positioned to actually start dealing with this thing, absent the noise. Okay, and that's the whole practice of Jesus. How do you see this? And so I in part what I attempt to model here, and it's not actually attempting to model, it's just how I live my life anymore. I have personally found that the only way to quiet the noise is to silence it by one, asking questions, and two, in my questioning, I'm going deeper and deeper into probing what is true to say, Jesus, what about these things? What about this? If we have 9, whatever the number is, alien craft with non-biological bodies. First question is, does that mean, and you're calling them demons, does that mean that demons possess perishable physical bodies? Is that what that means? Well, Jesus, how do you see that? Do fallen angels, does the angelic class possess perishable physical bodies? Well, if they don't, then what is that body?
Then that's not them.
Oh, it's not them, or are they planting something to do what? Because there is a lie, they're planting something in order to gain some kind of advantage over us through the installation of fear.
Wow. That's so strong.
See? That's just one question. So let's say the other one. They have their physical bodies, they do possess physical bodies that perish. Well, then what are we worried about? They're just going to perish like the rest of us, and then when they perish, where are they going? You see, you have a whole different line of questioning. Here's another one. Well, if you have 9 down craft, what does that mean in terms of their occupying the Earth airspace? Well, that's a fascinating, line of thought, because, in the United States, we have about 25,000 commercial flights a day. There are 8,000 to 9,000, 10,000 flights in the air at any given time, 365 days a year. So much so that when you see that illustrated, it completely covers, the map of the United States with the air travel. Well, how long has it taken for us to have 9 fatal commercial crashes? I mean, it's something like, I calculated this one time. It's astounding that even if you say those beings are just as competent as we are in flying craft, that there would have to be thousands and thousands of flights over our airspace every single day. It will look just like that picture. Well, is that what we're saying? Are we saying that if we have this radar capability to actually see them, that when we shoot it up in the air, that it blankets the heavens because there's so many craft going on there? Well, if that's the case, then why are you showing me only one?
Yeah.
When you see that one, what it should be doing is showing thousands behind it and around it, underneath it, over it. So I'm going to kind of go back to this positioning thing. And this is the greatest value to me, Matt, that I try to pass on to everyone. Jesus has a way of seeing things. He has invited us and stated that we have, past tense, been seated with him in heavenly places to view all of creation from his perspective. Why are we choosing to go to the high place? Why are we choosing to go even the highest place on the planet, where we still only see from the perspective of the planet? Why are we not accepting his invitation to do exactly what he said he has done? Seated us with him to see how this thing looks from his point of view. I'm just asking a few questions that have come out of sitting with that in that place.
Yeah.
And for me, it totally repositions me to look at these things in ways that I had never even entered the thought about.
Well, okay. So let me say it back to you. So here's the thing. This is why I think it's so important, Steve, and I assume you'd agree with me here. You know, I'm a guy journeying, right, with different experiences than you. I didn't play professional baseball.
Yeah.
You don't want me doing that.
No.
But there's a trajectory and a story of my life, and there's been things that God has used, right? And same with you. What I've found so powerful about engaging with you in this conversation is that it has become, I've often said it's made the scriptures like technicolor, right? It's made the truth stand out. And what is the basis of that? What you're saying, right? I'm inviting you to see things the way I see them. Okay. What I think is coming, and this is just a personal feeling of my own calling in role, right? I'm trying to understand, hey, what do you want me to do? Frank's saying the same thing. You've said the same thing. A lot of people are saying the same thing. And we talk about this idea of a transfer. Well, what is this transfer? It's a transfer of my heart and perspective to his.
Yes.
And that's an engaging thing that I can do minute by minute, day by day, right? Is to say, what do you think about this? How do you see it? And a lot of times the answer that we even see in the scriptures or that he speaks to us is counterintuitive. It's something that I do not expect to see or to hear. But that whole literally saying, all right, only you have the authority to speak to me, share with me your perspective. What I see across this world, because I agree with you, is a lot of fear. I see people like Tucker Carlson and I see Clayton Williams go, yeah, this is so dark, I don't share it with my wife. And I even whisper the idea that there would be beings of some kind who would literally devour humans. Well, that's spoken in the scriptures, right? And you know what's amazing about this is there's a system and a structure to this, right? If you actually look into the story, the Old Testament sacrificial system, there's a system, and that system has the shedding of blood. And the very core of this whole thing is actually the sacrifice of a son. And it's interesting with the what does that mean? And I look at what we're about to see, and this is really juxtaposed against my whole experience as a young man. I mean, I was doing all the crazy things young people do, giving no consideration to the framework of creation and that there is one that literally knows all and I can talk to. Okay. I didn't operate that way. I just kind of went my own way. But what's so incredible about this is that what we're talking about, the practice of the high, seated with him in the heavenlies and having his perspective is probably one of the most important practices somebody could have in this coming time.
Absolutely.
And that's where I'm at. Here, and I'm not a prophet, but I'm gonna kind of speak to 2024. I believe that there are going to be things that are accelerating in our understanding, whether they are truth or a lie, that there are going to be things that are shocking to people's systems, whether they're truth or a lie. There are going to be things exposed that you don't know how to make sense of. More and more things, everything from artificial intelligence to technologies that look like magic to crafts and creatures and acknowledgement of things that we've only heard about either in science fiction or in, religious texts. And you're going to have your head spinning.
Yeah.
And I think that what I hear from you, which is the basis of all this, is that how do you make sense of these things that up until now have not entered your mind?
Yeah.
What we're saying is the practice of this it's just like Think and Grow Rich, right? He's like, hey, there's one who's infinite intelligence, right? Well, yeah, what are we saying? We're saying that you were created in the image of God. And if you understand who you are, the evil forces want authority from you in order to have standing. Don't give it to them. Jesus is the one who only he has the authority to speak to you. And if you cultivate that relationship with him, he will give you his perspective. And I think about it like delight in the Lord and he'll give you the desires of your heart. Okay. I want to delight in him and see the perspective. Well, what is comforting? I remember 9/11 and the towers fell and everybody rushed into the church. Why? Because they didn't know how to process this thing that had just happened.
Yeah.
This is going to pale in comparison to towers falling. And I anticipate that there's a time where, everyone's like, well, I'm not going to be, I'm not going to be convinced by the beast. I'm not going to go along with that. And we hear about this thing that at some point in time we're deceived by. Oh, I'd never be deceived by that. Oh, really? Because you make a really good point. Hey, do you understand angels to be able to procreate? Huh. These questions are ones that actually make you examine something that you thought you knew was true.
Yeah.
And I guess that's the point I'm making is that people are going to be looking at you and me and others and going, I'm so stricken with fear. And it reminds me of David. He wasn't stricken with fear. He's like, I fought the lion and the bear.
Yeah.
And it's like this practice. I almost feel like this is the provision of Jesus to say, hey, I'm here. I'm like a father who sits at the end of your bed. You can talk about anything. Are you really going to give me perspective? Yeah. The peace of God, which transcends all understanding, will guard your hearts and minds in Christ Jesus. Hold on. You're going to guard me from this? Yes. And I'm going to show you my perspective.
Yeah.
To me, this is the thing. And it's in a way the practical of what you've called the transfer. Is like these practices are really the only means by which you have comfort because he's the only one that knows the truth. Don't listen to men. And that's what I love about you, Steve. You've always said that to me. Don't trust me, ask him yourself. And that's all I'm trying to promote.
And by the way, the thing I would offer in that, Matt, that it's the only thing to promote. What else do you got to sell?
Yeah.
Everything else is just reserved for what my opinion is about things.
Yeah, exactly.
And doggone, my opinion has done nothing but get me in trouble. And not that I had ill intent in my opinions or I was uneducated or uninformed. It's just that I don't have the breadth of perspective or vision that he has.
Yeah. Yep.
Why is Frank so willing to come under his mentor? Well, we would applaud that. In business terms, it was a big deal. You lived through some of it. Well, man, most important thing a chief executive could do is get themselves an executive coach, a mentor. And one was a mentor and one was a mentee and all of this various stuff. But why are you doing that? Well, it's because there's a breadth of perspective that the mentor has that you recognize if you're just not playing the game. If you're not gaming it, but if you're literally like Frank is transferring, interesting idea, transferring to his mentor his lack of experience and depth of understanding and scope of vision in exchange for all those things that his mentor possesses. And he's saying, hey, I don't want to speak from my perspective. What I'd like to do is to share the things I've learned from my mentor. What an interesting concept.
Mm-hmm.
Well, why in the world would I not do that with the guy who put the whole thing together?
Amen, dude. Amen.
That to me, you always use the word practical. That is the most practical thing that in my life experience that I learned back in, almost 45 years ago.
You know what's
why
interesting?
Bank on what I know or what some other guy knows? Why don't I just ask the guy who built it?
Yeah.
And by golly, if he didn't answer.
Here's something, and this is, you're probably reluctant to hear these compliments, but what I appreciate about the framework, though, is that you are a person I can call on the phone, right? And I'm not saying Jesus doesn't have a number, right?
Mm-hmm.
He certainly does. But also there's a gift that you've been given that I assume you recognize, right? There's, in that practice of asking those questions and having that dialogue, so much of this is, and you've seen me wrapped around the axle emotionally or whatever it may be, right? We've seen all sorts of people go through different things, and this, God has given us this communal thing, right? Friendship, relationship, love, care, family, whatever you want to call it, the powwows or whatever. And God has gifted you with the ability to communicate these things, but it's based in, the reason I keep coming back, Steve, isn't because you're so, eloquent. I keep coming back because the foundation is true. I keep coming back because the foundation is true, because you keep coming back to this. Don't listen to me, right? But what are you doing? You're providing encouragement, right? I don't look at you and go, hey, that's Jesus. But in some respects, what are you saying to me? Hey, see if these things match up, because the truth is probable.
Yes.
So if I say something that's untrue, you can ask him and verify.
Yep.
But if it is true, you're an extension of him.
Yeah.
And my desire is to be an extension of him as well, right?
Sure.
Hey, I want to help encourage. And I feel like he has created this place. And, we use kind of this loosely, this ecclesia of those who are called out. You're an encouragement to me, Steve, and to many others, because of the gift, but also of the humility of going, I'm going to point you to the one who knows. And you haven't ever presented it as if, well, I know everything and you don't need to talk to Jesus. I see that in the religious world.
Yeah.
And this is what is so amazing about this. You said many times, you said, if I'm a false prophet, I'm not a very good one. And that's what I love about this, is that you've left to God the things of God. And you've said, I'll do whatever you call me to do. And so I want to say thank you. I want to encourage you, but also I want you to know that I think it's really helpful to have people who represent Jesus in the flesh. It's helpful to me. I don't have that same kind of I see him work in so many different ways. And some people say, really, you think Jesus is talking to you about that? Yeah, I do. It's different, right? His engagement with me is different. But I also appreciate the questions that you've asked to him that you would also ask of me. You'd say, hey, well, this is what I asked. What do you think about that? And it's like, oh, it opens up a new room. And you're like, okay, I'm getting better understanding. Maybe I should go to ask him about that. Not that you would be a proxy or a replacement for Jesus. And I think that's really important, because so many people I see in the church are trying to be a proxy for. I see that in counseling, that they're literally saying, I'll be your Messiah for you. And I just want to give you a lot of credit to say, you've never presented yourself that way. You've always presented yourself as saying, hey, here's what I've learned. Go ask him yourself.
Yeah.
And that to me is at the core of this whole thing, is that you can try him on for size. That's why it's so accessible. So
that is a high compliment, Matt, and I really appreciate it. There is, again, a very practical part of it, which is I am limited in my vocabulary, my experience, and my perspective. So basically what I'm offering is an intro into something bigger.
Yeah.
That I'm not equipped to give you.
Yeah.
But I know the guy who is.
Yeah.
And if it lights my fire the way it does, guess what? I think I might do the same thing for you. And then what? We are experiencing the very width dynamic of the kingdom.
Yeah.
The kingdom is built on width. W-I-T-H. It's not built on me. Yes, I am a part of the width because there can't be a width without also a me.
Mm-hmm.
But the me is swallowed up in the us. Oh, the width.
Yeah.
It's so simple. Once you see it, it's like, well, why wouldn't I want to be a part of that? You know, that doggone it. I mean, I played on professional sports teams, and I'll tell you what the difference is in very real terms between a group of guys who's built on a me principle and a guy who's in a team that's built on an us principle.
Yeah. Yeah.
One plays a lot of games, can make a few bucks, and gets beat 2/3 of the time. The other wins championships.
Mm-hmm.
Very practical. It is so, why? Because, see, to me, I've come to learn what practical is. It's just in alignment with the way he built this kingdom.
Mm-hmm.
The way he built his creation, that's what's practical.
Yep.
Why? Because it produces results.
Yep.
It bears the fruit of the kingdom. That's how you know it's practical.
Well, and it's how you know it's authentic. It's so good, Steve. It's so good. Well, I appreciate it. And it's, you know, it's in these kind of conversations that, you know, just when you think you can't discover something more or see the more depth or understand more truth, in a way, in its revelation, it becomes even more simple, right? You keep coming back to the fact that, okay, and this is where I think things are going, Steve. The need, you know, people have, you know, I had a stream yesterday where literally like demonic forces came in and attacked. And it was crazy, but it was evidence. It was, I thanked the guy who came in and literally like ripped off his face and showed, you know, the demonic, you know, directly to us, was the contrast that it provided and what it was saying and what it was trying to accomplish. And it's interesting. I've learned this through engagement with you over the last year, is to say, all you have to do is listen for a minute and they'll tell you exactly where they're coming from and what they want. And you realize that authority is so important, is they're trying to gain that authority from you and trying to draw you off sides and all of these things. And I feel this gravity personally, that in the context of crypto and in the context of community, that we're going to be coming into a time where there's much confusion for those that are not rooted in this practice, which is to say, is there one who knows the truth, Steve? Well, yes, there is. Well, is he like, do I have to hop on one foot on Wednesdays of leap year in order to talk to him? No, you got direct access. Who is this one? Who is this one who knows all of these things? Well, guess what his currency is? His currency is peace. And I think about that in this coming time, which is confusion, which is all these questions about crafts and the demonic, and, you know, people having this ontological shock about, what do you mean we're not alone? What do you mean there are other creatures? What do you mean there are other species? What do you mean there's other things that are intelligent? What is intelligence? We're going to create artificial intelligence. There's so many things that are coming, that the root of all of this is the framework. And that's why I'm like, Steve, you're like an angel, man. You came and I met you, and it's like, hold on, you're providing this context that says, would I ever give authority to something that is fixed to the ground? Never would I. And it's like, okay, well, how do I relate to that? Well, because this guy Steve said, hey, Jesus is alive and he speaks. to think that the church, and what I have learned over the years, has been neutered so much that I would be convinced that he's dead, and only we talk about him historically rather than one who speaks. Because I told you this the other day that literally the pastor from the pulpit said, you need to come underneath the authority of the Bible. And it sounds like to somebody who's like in church, well, that sounds kind of nice. What are we really saying? We're saying if I have to come underneath the authority of the Bible, that means that Jesus is not alive and he does not speak. Because if it's a testament, it is a testimony.
Yeah.
If it is a testament, it is a testimony. And what is my testimony? He's alive and he speaks.
Yeah, right on.
And every single thing that I see suggests that everyone's been talking to him since the beginning.
Yeah.
And he's conferring with the others, and that this isn't all there is. And so as we come into this time where these things are being exposed and they're on the run, I think the level of potential deception is only on the rise.
Yes. There's a desperation, and there is a desperation in the kingdom of darkness, and desperate people do desperate things.
Yes.
They no longer function intelligently. They no longer care about how they're perceived. They just care about surviving. And that is what we're observing.
Yeah.
I mean, for, people in my generation, I hear you talk sometimes about, about the boomers and the Xers and all of that stuff. Look, I remember when all this stuff happened. I tell my grandkids, a little bit older, they're in their 20s. I tell them all the time, you haven't come up with squat. I haven't seen you go and be mowed down at Kent State University.
Yeah.
Haven't seen you do that.
Mm-hmm.
I've seen you tear down, other people's property. I've seen you burn stuff to the ground. I haven't seen a gun pointed at your head and the trigger pulled. Look at what you guys are doing. We started. Yeah. And I don't say that with any pride. I say that with, whoa, Lord, there was something in play that has produced this time. What is it?
Yeah.
What is going on here? What you see, for example, in the 60s white paper is the answer to that question. What the heck is going on? What started all this stuff? Where did the tipping point come that began it? Where's the tipping point going to end up where this thing finishes off? And what you end up seeing, very, very simply, when it's all netted out, it's, well, I judge based on what another person says, because that's what materializes reality. And so when the devil came in and he convinced my man to transfer all he was and all he had to him, guess what the mechanism of judgment is going to be for the serpent, for the devil? In the same manner, all that he has and all that he possesses is going to be transferred back to the one from whom he took it.
If you want that 1960s white paper, yes. Wow. If you haven't read the 1960s white paper, you can request it from Steve. Here's his email. He's got an AOL address, so he's old school. Kicking it old school. Steve Staggs, I encourage you to request that. All right, last 15 minutes, Steve. The lightning round.
Yeah, let's do it.
So here we go. I made some slides. Some slides, Steve.
You're good at this, man. Look at that.
I'm using AI. I'm in yeah. That's right. So, okay, last time we talked, I was really moved by this idea of what are you feasting off of, right? What are you eating from, right? And we talk about this tree of knowledge of good and evil, and this is back in the garden, and a tree of life, right? And this is a really good metaphor juxtaposing this idea that there's knowledge that I would have. And it's like, well, surely he didn't say that. I'm resting on my own understandings, right? AI, I've got all the information. I can be transhuman. I can implant things in my brain. I know everything because I know physics, or I know this, or, this is the lifting up of man and knowledge, right? And then there's this tree of life that stands there as well, that has the leaves for the healing and this eternity, right? So this kind of choice. And I had not seen the trees in this way, even though it's pretty obvious. I should have seen them this way. But this was interesting, this idea of which one am I going to feast off? And it's interesting that, who represents life here in all of this? And that's kind of this dynamic. So I built some slides, and I want to kind of just share them with you and get your comments on them, because they may need to be like edited a bit, but I'm formulating essentially this left, right hand side kind of thing in all of this.
Yeah.
The second one is really these are all AI created images, but I see in them some really interesting things. And this is what AI came up with, right? Well, we got this serpent wrapped around this tree, right? In this tree and the fruit, and what was representative of eating of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, and knowing, being like God, having our eyes open, which is really ultimately this point in which we can make the choice, right? We can see the difference. I think it's interesting what it put in the background.
Yeah.
I don't know if you noticed that. It's funny.
It's
like there's a guy with a trident, and it's interesting that, the story that we would tell. I'm not saying AI's got anything figured out, but I thought it was interesting. But if you look at this offering, right, from the woman to Adam, this idea that, you said it many times. I mean, the serpent himself had to utilize the authority and function of God's man, and to corrupt him and to tempt him and all of these things. So that was important in this conversation. And then this one, and this was really trying to articulate this concept of, we find ourselves in a situation where the more and more we dive deeply into the knowledge, right, that I would be essentially to be worshipped, right, that I have power, is that through knowledge I gain power. And what do I see? What people are lording and hoarding that power, and what does it create? Extraction and scarcity, and we've got skulls and money and all the stuff, which is an interesting thing. AI doesn't do skulls very well. And then the other side, which is what we would picture as, what is the kingdom? This one of abundance, this one of life, right? A tree of life. And that led to this kind of what's happening in the world today. And I see the money changing, right? We talk about crypto and a whole new economic system. And, there's forces that don't want the money to get out of their control, right? What do you mean you're using immutable contracts on the blockchain? We can't change the supply. Hold on, you can't do this. So the money is changing. The politics of power and governance is changing, and it is becoming rickety at best. And then we've got disclosure. Well, what is this? We're coming close to understanding, or at least being fearful of, things that were unknown that are being exposed to the light. And then we've got man's desire to generate the digital God, one that you can talk to. You can chat with him, Steve. He's Chat GPT. And that maybe he'll become generalized in intelligence, and maybe then super intelligent, and then maybe destroy everyone, right? Fear, 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 fear. All of these things are coming. And that led me to this, the simplicity of this, to say, on one side of this, we've got this depth of knowledge, which gives power. And we think about that. So like, where are you going to college? I mean, my daughter's considering going. Why are you going to college? Well, I think that in this structure of scarcity, that if I get a better education and to know the better people, I might be able to get more of the piece of the action that gives me more power over others. It's interesting, the system that we live in, versus this idea of authority. Well, walking within whose authority, and how does that bring life? And so I'm trying to take these things that I've learned from you and go, how do I understand them? And it led to this. And so this is kind of the quintessential slide, is this idea that we would keep very simply, this idea that there is a choice to be made. And what I think is so incredible is this idea of, what is the nature and character of the choice that you're making?
Yeah.
What is the nature and character of the choice that you're making? And of course, we talk about this in the crypto space of considering others in addition to yourself. Well, that's one piece of it. but this kind of command of saying, you have at the beginning, I mean, he gave Adam the ability to name the animals. He literally put them under his authority and said, you can have naming rights to the animals. You're going to rule and reign and have dominion and subdue. And it's like, hold on a second. We're eating slop with the pigs, and he's welcoming us back, because in this process, right, of the ability to have this choice between good and evil, we come, and he's financed my debauchery, man. I'm coming back to understand what his nature and character is. And what is amazing is I feel like it comes with a ring, meaning he wants you to represent him, but in his nature and character. So all of that, I'll vomit on you. Feedback. Where have I gotten things wrong, or what can I improve?
Well, I don't want to talk in terms of what you've done wrong, because this is evidence of you processing these concepts and ideas, and I mean, you have a great way of framing those. Go to the first slide again.
Yep. All right. Let me go zip back here.
Okay, the first slide. First question: is this what Adam and Eve saw in the garden?
No.
No. What did they see in the garden?
Trees that had fruit that you could consume.
That were beautiful.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. Full.
And it was good. And it was good.
Whoa. You looked at those things. Gorgeous. So what is this slide illustrating? What I would offer, for sake of time, now that I've asked the question to get you to think about, what is this slide illustrating? What was there but yet unseen?
Right.
This is the fruit of those two trees. On the surface, they looked identically the same. Beautiful, gorgeous, full of fruit, looking delicious, both made by the hand of God. And yet, what was it that the fruit of both of those would produce?
I mean, one was death.
And
one was life.
Right. The thing that knowledge does is it promises you short-term results at the expense of long-term destruction. And that's what you have illustrated. So you mentioned earlier about, these demons wanting, the sacrifice of children, and hungering and thirsting for blood and human sacrifice and all of that. Well, why? See, we'll look at the dastardly deed. We'll see the wickedness. We'll see the horrific behavior, but we won't stop and say, why do they thirst for blood? Why do they do that? Well, there's this little statement that Jehovah was sharing with Moses that said that life is in the blood. They have no life in them, and they are starving for it.
Wow.
And the only one that possesses it is God's man.
Wow.
And they can consume all the human blood they want, and they will never be satisfied.
Wow.
They will never gain what they search for. So the effect of their choice, which was to feast on knowledge, to give them short-term results without recognizing that it produces long-term destruction, they are forever and perennially thirsting for life because that's what they traded.
Wow.
Now, Jesus asked a similar question that if we ever got into it, we'd talk about it some more, which he asked the question, who among you would or what man is there that would trade his soul in exchange for all the wealth on the earth? What would a man give? Would he give his soul in exchange for the entirety of the earth's wealth?
Hmm.
Yeah, he said, what man would do that? Okay. Well, the smart man wouldn't do that. But the man who is exchanging his life for knowledge will do that every day. And until he changes that mechanism of decision making, he'll do it every time. By the way, we see that on the thief and the cross. The thief that was asking for him, what was he doing? Hey, if you're the Son of Man, come down off of there and then command us to come down too. What was he doing? See? Short-term results in exchange for long-term destruction. He just wasn't getting it. It was all about me.
Yeah.
So another thing that Jesus said when the disciples came out, and I'm pointing these so those in the audience can actually go look at these stories and read about them, that will help them. Jesus comes out of his time of prayer, and the disciples come to him and try to convince him of the suitability of the temple complex as being the home of God. And Jesus says, man, don't you see what you're looking at? For them, they were seeing this tree on the left side as in its present state of beauty. What was Jesus saying? Where it was headed.
Mm.
Do you not see? Do you not recognize? Are you not seeing with your physical eyes in order to see into the spiritual domain the activity that is going on there so that you can make the appropriate choice? I'm telling you, while you see this as a long-term suitable place for God, I'm telling you, not one stone is going to be left on top of another.
Wow.
This thing is all disintegrating.
Well, when you think about
this slide.
Yeah. When you think about, you mentioned this at our Gen Con, what is the building of God's man?
Yeah.
And it's interesting, Moses goes up the mountain, right? And there's some suggestion that he sees the throne room of God, and that essentially there's a reproduction of that, right? That there's this veil, and there's this place where God sits, and there's this place where you are. And of course, what is built after that but the tabernacle, right? And we think about, where did the 10 Commandments and Aaron's staff and the manna go? But in this place, and what was this representation of this thing? And it's interesting that, that first temple and what was talked about how people gave to build that. And of course, fast forward now to this idea that Jesus is saying, you are the temple of the Holy Spirit. You are an extension. Who are you? You are a son of God. And to think that that is a picture, that temple or that tent, but that those who gave to it to construct it, right? In the initiation of David to give from his own personal wealth, and then the people to give what they could give to build God's man. And I thought it was so powerful to think that in this process of that, it's a representation of who we are in him, that we are actually that temple. And of course, if that is analogous to a veil and an approaching God, right? It's a physical representation of this interface with him. That what an amazing thing that the blood of Jesus provided.
Yeah.
And it provides this access that is to say, no, it will be torn down in 3 days. It's so amazing. And then you talk about life and blood, and you're just like, oh my goodness, this stuff, if it's not technicolor, it's nothing.
Well, and then you go into, okay, what did the devil desire but the life of man?
Yeah.
So he took the life of man, whose name was Jesus, and what did he get in exchange? He was thirsting for life to control. If you go down that track, you go, oh my gosh, this is way bigger than what I thought.
Yes.
when, and you have to hear how I say, this is way more than stuff being under the blood.
Yeah.
No. Let me tell you what, this is way bigger than that. And when you see that, it's like, wow, no wonder I don't have to worry about what is coming down the pike.
Yeah.
It can't get here unless I give it permission to enter. As for me and my house, that permission is denied.
Amen.
You have no access. Only one has access. That's what it is to bind the strong man. Nope, you don't get to come in here. And let me tell you what, it is, when that reality starts functioning and happening in your life, that is not a theological premise.
Right.
That is just how it works.
2 hours, Steve.
We kind of blew through that, didn't we?
We did. It was like, once again, a blink of an eye, and 2 hours have gone by. Steve, amazing. Frank, thanks for joining, Frank. Appreciate that.
Yes,
Thanks
Frank,
for so many
yeah.
who joined in today. We had more viewers than we've ever had today. Thanks, Frank. You brought him in.
Yeah, that boy Frank.
That's so great. It's Steve, thanks for doing this. I really appreciate it.
My pleasure. Thank you for having us.
Well, Merry Christmas to you. And I just I'm excited for our I got a big meeting tomorrow that could be very, very consequential in the future of all of these things, which I'm really
Awesome.
excited about and conferring. I'm sharing wishes about it. But thank you very much. I appreciate it a lot.
Very good. Merry Christmas to everybody. Hope you have a great year.
Awesome. Once again, you spent 2 hours with Steve and Frank and myself. Folks, this is big stuff. Here's the thing. And I'm speaking to anyone who like has ears to hear and you've been paying attention to this stuff. Let's say you've been here and you've watched some of these things, or maybe you've been here since the beginning. I sense that what's coming is this framework, which is simple, right? Of understanding that there is one who has, that is the truth, right? That is the life, that is the way, is going to become so obvious and so relevant. And there are going to be people around you who literally don't know which way is up. And to think that, like, literally Jesus sent Steve and said, hey, I'm going to introduce you to this guy. You're going to have a Manhattan with him, right? You're going to shake his hand and you're going to go, wow. So preparation for a time where people are going to be unglued. They're going to be shocked. That's what's going to happen in 2024, in my opinion. And it's not because of the chart. It's because of what is to be revealed. And you think about it as well, a lot of people, I didn't have any like use for Jesus. I spent 28 years of my life making fun of you people, right? It was goofiness. It was like, this is like, something for nerds to do. But I didn't realize it had power. I didn't know it was truth. I didn't know it was real. And now as the stakes are increasing, it's like, no, I captured your heart. So that what? You have this authority. And what I feel like is coming, and what our responsibility, my responsibility is to be able to understand how to articulate to folks that there's direct access to the one who knows it all and has the perspective, who would love to tell you what it's all about and how it's structured and formatted, and help you discern things. Because I feel like what is to come is going to really deceive a lot of people. And so I'm just thankful for Steve. I'm thankful for this. Just Jesus is alive and he speaks. Wow. Just rest in that one. Try him on for size. This isn't some like, oh, you got to go to my church. No, it's not what this is about. It's to say the creator of all things, right? Literally the creator of all things. We're about to see if you haven't looked out at the stars and went, man, there's a lot of them, and just been overwhelmed with how big this thing is, just wait, right? The biggest news in human history, right? We're not alone. Well, It's been talked about for a long time, but you're going to come face to face with understanding this, and it's going to freak some people out, and they're going to be like, which way is up? And once again, the answer, as Frank has said, is Jesus. Thanks for joining the Pulse today, the 32nd episode, December 15th. If we don't talk to you in the meantime, have a great Christmas, a great New Year. And you know what, folks? Realize that what is happening here with Richard Hart, with altcoins and all this stuff is a part of a much, much bigger story. So thanks for joining, and do not mess with Texas. Take care, everybody.